is our globe, and we're going to introduce the topic of the Native Americans, or the Indians as we call them. And this, of course, is America, as you know. All right. And I guess the question has always been, how did the Indians really get here? As we look across the globe, if you remember, the Garden of Eden was in, I'll find it here, the Garden of Eden was in somewhere in this location. This is where Jesus was born. This is where the population of the world began, and of course it began to spread as people, there got to be more and more people. And it spread easily. We can see how it spread here. But look at, we're clear an ocean away from them. And even if you go this way, you know, we're a long way from the United States of America. Some people think that perhaps there's if you look up right here at this top, okay, this is Alaska, this is Russia. Some people thought that perhaps they went from here across. That is one theory. Some people think that everything was all hooked together at one time and it all broke apart. I don't know what your theory is, and I'm not even sure exactly what my theory is, but whatever my theory is, the Indians were here before the white man. And so we call them Indians incorrectly. Remember, it was Mr. Columbus who thought he was in India, and so he named them Indians, thinking he was close to India. And as we know, no, he wasn't even close, not even a little bit close. And so that name just kind of stuck. Today it's more polite to call them Native Americans. But for my studies, I'm going to call them Indians for now. Indians lived in groups. They didn't live in big cities, not like the white man. The white man got together, like one of the biggest cities at the very first of the beginning of America was Boston. And the people gathered together, and they, I guess because they were together, they were more protected. Because they were together, they felt that there was more commerce. You know, people were buying and selling and that kind of thing. So the white man was used to big cities. In Paul's day, in Jesus' day, in the day of the Old Testament, there are many, many big cities in this area. But the Native Americans, the Indians, were not used to big cities. They were used to just little groups, and they called the little groups tribes. Now, we probably would have called them villages. We might have called them a small town, but they called them tribes. And the Indians lived in tribe after tribe after tribe. But one of the interesting things is that the tribes were very much separate. In other words, there wasn't like a whole group of Indians, like a tribe and a tribe and a tribe and a tribe and a tribe, that all had the same government or all had the same leader. Now, each little group, each little tribe had their own thoughts, their own ways, and their own leaders, and which was different than the philosophy of the white man. As you know, the Indian culture, the Indians or the Native Americans have very black hair. There are no blonde Indians. They all have brown eyes. Their hair is very straight. There's no curly-headed Indians, so to speak. Their hair is straight. It's thick. They don't have a lot of hair on their body. That means, you know, you don't see Indians with usually long beards or big mustaches or even hairy arms. They're very smooth people, but they have a whole head of dark black hair. The Indians had different, well, okay, in some ways they were the same as far as moms and dads and kids. Their relationship was the same. They loved each other and took care of each other and that kind of thing. The Indian dads had two main purposes. One of their purposes was to protect their family. And probably just like your dads, right? Right, okay. So they protected their families, and they would go to all ends to protect their wives, to protect their children. And so warring, fighting with another tribe was kind of a habit, or it was common. And so they were into protection. And the other thing that they did, the men gathered or got food. They provided food for the family. Now, that might have been in killing an animal, usually that, more than picking berries. That was kind of woman's work. But they were all about getting food and in fishing or in hunting and then protecting the family. Those were their two main things, the two main roles that the Indian daddies had. The moms were, on the other hand, they were asked to take care of the children. Now, it was not dad's job to take care of kids. Today, you find all kinds of dads that take care of kids all the time. But it wasn't so in Indian culture. Women took care of kids, and that was all there was to it. Dad didn't stay home from the hunt or whatever to babysit the kids. He was out hunting. That was his job. And the woman just knew it. She never asked him to do anything else. So the women were the carers of kiddos, and they were the ones that if they stayed in a little village very long and didn't move, they grew the crops, they gathered the food, they made the clothes, and they built the house. Like building a house, not just building the inside, decorating it, but they built it from the outside. Whether it was a teepee, whether it was a wigwam, whether it was a stick house, it was woman's job to build the house. It was not a dad's job. And when a woman had a little small baby, you think, well, how are they going to do much work carrying a baby? They just strapped the baby on their back. And the baby was called a little papoose, and that's a little small baby. And they put the papoose on a cradle board, which was it was like a flat piece of board. And they would lace it up, and then they hook it on their back, kind of like a backpack. And the little papoose would be on their back all day long. And sometimes, if she was going to be doing gardening or picking berries in a certain spot, sometimes she would take the baby off and hang him in the tree. And there the baby would just be happy as can be, hanging in the tree, watching mommy pick the berries. So those were the women's job, to take care of the family, including fixing the food and making the house and making the clothes. That was women's work. The boys and the girls, they were helpers. At first, they were helpers to mom, and they helped mom just like you help mom at your house. And then as the boy got to be about 13, 14, able to go out with the men, and then his roles changed. And then from that time, he was counted as a man. We'll talk about that in a minute. So if you look at your book, and it's this tan book, looks like that. Okay, I'm looking at pages 23, 24, 25, right in there. So if you look at those books, on page 25, you can see some of the Native Americans and some of the things that they like to do and were asked to do. You can see there's a longhouse, and they call it a longhouse because, yes, it was a longhouse. And many families lived in there, not usually just one family, but there maybe 2 or 3 families lived in a longhouse like that. You can see the boy at the top, and he's learning to shoot an arrow from a bow. And there's his dad in the background. Dad's teaching him because he's going to need to know how to shoot an animal in order to eat. Remember, these people were all about natural resources. They were not manufacturers. Manufacturers, that means made by hand. That word M-A-N, man, means hand, like a manual. Like a manual that you would get for maybe your tractor, like a book that would tell all about it. That is something you use with your hands to open it up and check back and forth. Manufacture has to do with being made by hand. The Indians did not have manufacturing. They used things that God had provided in nature, and they made things from nature, but they did not go to a factory. Those that had not been thought of nor invented. They did not know anything about making or inventing the wheel and using that. So they were kind of basic in their knowledge, but they were good at what they were good at. And making a bow and an arrow is what they were good at. So that's what the little boy is doing at the top of the page. And at the bottom of the page, you can see there is a little girl, probably learning from a grandma, how to make string from cotton, because some Indians actually did have cotton. The Indians that were in the southwestern part of America had cotton. And so she was showing this grandma showing the little girl how to make string, or maybe she was cutting up a piece of hide to make a rope to be able to be used for a lot of different purposes. The Indians did not know how to read, and they did not know how to write. They had no written language. The boys and girls did not go to school, kind of like you. You're not going to school either, are you? No, that's what I thought. Okay, they did not go to school, so there was no written language. And it's kind of interesting. One tribe spoke this language, and another tribe spoke another language. There was not a gigantic group of people that spoke the same language. Every little tribe kind of had their own little language, and how they got it, they made it up or whatever, I don't know. It was passed on from generation to generation, I assume, but they had no way to write it. So you couldn't write your mom a note. Hey, Mom, I'm going to go play with flying eagle down the street. They couldn't say that because there was no alphabet that had not been thought through. That had not been invented. And so their learning had to be taught by doing. So moms and dads spent their days, just like maybe your daddy spends his day, some of his day, teaching you how to do things, like things to look at the car. Like someday maybe you'll be able to change the oil in the car. Or some days you can maybe learn how to run the lawnmower and learn how to take care of a lawnmower. Or maybe daddy's going to teach you about electricity because, all of you are not just going to stay 8. You're going to be grown up, just like daddy's a grown up. Well, one time, a long time ago, he used to be 8. And so maybe your grandpa taught your dad how to do something with electricity. And, those are good things for boys to learn. Those are things that you're going to need all of your life. And the more you can learn when you're just little, you're going to be your wife, believe it or not, you are going to get married. Your wife is going to be so blessed because you learned it when you were little. And thank you, dads, for taking time to teach little people. That is important. That's how these little ones are going to learn. If you just do everything for them, okay, that's nice, but they don't learn as much as if you take your time and help them learn. And sometimes learning just comes from making a mistake. Everything's not going to be perfect the first time. So dads, thank you for helping your child, your son or your daughter learn along the way and train them along the way. And that's what these Indians' dad had to do, because there was no other way for a boy to learn how to shoot an arrow unless his daddy taught him. There's no way for a boy to know how to shoot a gun accurately unless he's taught by somebody. You don't go out and be a big a marksman without some lessons. So thank you for teaching. Down at the bottom, you can see that these girls also learned at home. They were constantly with Mom, and Mom was helping them, showing them where the best berries grew, showing them what roots you could eat, showing them what leaves you could eat, what bark you could eat, showing you how you could make a stew or a soup from what grows in nature. And the mommies knew it, and she taught it to their daughters, and the daughters went on and taught it, I'd teach it to their daughters, and on it would go. So they learned by doing. They didn't learn by books. Some of your learning comes by books, but their learning did not. It was a big important step in a boy's life to be counted as a man. When he got to be about 13, which was about 7th, 8th grade in there, they would have a ceremony. They called it an initiation ceremony, and it would be where the boy would prove that he was not a scaredy cat, and that he could be as brave as any warrior, and he went through a thing called an initiation. And remember, the Indians had no knowledge of Jesus Christ. So you have to keep that in your mind. They had nothing in their heads. And they did think of some things, and maybe they, thought about the great white spirit or whatever in the sky. They had some thoughts, but they had no word of God. And they had no knowledge of Christ. And because of those two things, they made up things that were, to our way of thinking, would be foolish. They would be ridiculous. But to their way of thinking, it was the best that they could come up with. Now remember, we talked before, the white man eventually took over America. And perhaps the reason for that was that the white man had the Word of God. And he could come and tell the Indians for the first time that Jesus Christ died for them on the cross. And they didn't have to make up all this stuff that they were trying to do to please the Great Spirit. And so maybe that's why the white man of America took over the Indian population. I don't know. But it does seem logical that when the white man came, there were some changes in some Indians' lives, because for the first time they'd heard about Jesus Christ. Going back to this initiation, when a boy was about 13, many of the dads, their thinking was, I'm going to take my son out into a forest and leave him. Not with a weapon, just leave him and go back to camp. And the boy was to be brave enough and stay out in the forest for a period of time, sometimes 2 weeks, something like that. And they would prove that they could feed themselves and protect themselves by making things, by making some kind of a hut to sleep in, by getting food, by killing a prairie hen with a stick, I don't know. Anyway, something like that. And then when they passed the test and Dad would go out and find this child in the forest, he was no longer just a little boy. He was a man. And he brought him back to the tribal leaders, and they all praised him because he had done everything. He had lived and survived for 2 weeks out in the middle of nowhere. And there was a big feast that was held. And everyone came, and everyone was invited, and there was a lot of food and dancing and beating of drums and praise. And the father was so happy with his son because his son now was a man. And then they made up even stranger things. I mean, that was kind of hard, but the stranger things, like they hoped that he would see a spirit when he was out in this woods. And they had a lot of this spiritual talk, maybe a spirit would talk to him, and on it would go. But once the boy became a man, he never went back to being a boy. And in a way, it's going to be the same thing with you. Yeah, you're 8 and you're still a kid, and no one thinks of you as a grown-up. But one of these days, in another 8 years, you're going to be 16 years old. And guess what? You're going to be on your way to manhood, and you are not ever going back to being an 8-year-old. You're never going back. You're only going forward. So your turn is coming. And once you get to be about 16, you're going to get a car, or you're going to get to drive a car, and you will be on your way to manhood. Part of being a man is you start learning it now. So that's why, at recess time, when you get hurt at recess, I've noticed that many second grade boys don't spend a lot of time crying about it. Yeah, okay, I understand you break your arm, you're going to cry. Okay, that's not a big deal. But we're talking about scrapes and boo-boos and bumps. A boy is a boy. He's meant to be a protector and a soldier. And all of us women say thank you to men in our lives, whether it's our husbands, whether it's our dads, whether it's our sons. There are people in a woman's life that are so, so important. And boys, that's what you're becoming. You're becoming a man. And right now, you're just a little man. But everything you can learn now is going to prepare you for manhood, which is just around the corner. All right. We're going to stop there, where I'm stopping on page 26 if you want to read it for yourself. And then we're going to continue the next time we talk. So, thank you for listening.